This is the strangest thing found growing inside of a human being. Sanju lived in Nagpur, India in 2006. Since birth, his stomach was hugely swollen, which usually got him bullied. But it didn't cause him any health problems until one day when he suddenly couldn't breathe. He was rushed to the hospital with doctors believing he had a tumor in his stomach. But when they cut him open to get the tumor out, something very strange happened. Doctors were horrified to see a small hand with long nails reach out towards them. Then another hand appeared as a small, deformed creature began pulling itself out of Sanju. At first, the terrified doctors thought Sanju had just given birth to a malformed human, but they soon discovered the truth. The strange creature was Sanju's twin brother. Sanju had accidentally swallowed him while they were in the womb. Since then, his twin lived in him like a parasite leeching off of his blood. This woman received strange one-word letters for 4 years, and when she saw what they spelled out, she immediately called the police. Katy Perry was a single mother living with her daughter Sarah in Georgia in 1964. Being a single mom, Katy worked really hard her whole life, and so she was really happy when her daughter Sarah got accepted into college. Before leaving for college, Sarah promised to send her mom a letter every month and visit her whenever she could. As promised, Sarah sent her mom letters every month telling her how much she was enjoying the college life. Katy missed her daughter so much that one day she decided to go through all her old letters. As she started reading through them, she soon realized something very strange. Every single letter had exactly one misspelled word, which was strange because Sarah was not a clumsy writer. When she put all the misspelled words together, they formed a very disturbing message. Part 2 will be out in 30 minutes. This woman received strange one-word letters for 4 years, and when she saw what they all spelled out, she immediately called the police. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. The message started off by saying, "Never made it to college? Find me, please." It turns out Sarah was kidnapped on her way to college, and her kidnapper made her write these letters to her mom so she wouldn't suspect anything. In her hidden message, Sarah described in detail where she was being kept. Katy immediately called the police and told them what she had discovered. With all the information from Sarah's hidden messages, police were able to find her and her kidnapper and reunite her with her mom after 4 years. For anyone wondering where I get some of my stories, click over here and get yarn. For more stories, click over here and follow me on IG. This 36-year-old man poured acid on this 12-year-old's face after she rejected him. Part 1. Sorry for the wait. Lakshmi Agarwal was born to a poor family in New Delhi, India. She lived in a small house and her father worked really hard to make ends meet. To help her family, Lakshmi also worked at a bookstore after school. One day, while working at the bookstore, she got a text from an old family friend. The text read, "Lakshmi, I love you and I want to marry you." Embarrassed and uncomfortable, Lakshmi replied she would never marry him. But later that night, the man texted her back saying, "Lakshmi, you need to marry me if you want to have a good life and make your parents proud." She replied, "No, you're wrong," and never got a reply back. The next morning, she was on her way to school when she saw him with a couple of his friends. Wanting to avoid him, she quickly started walking away from them. Suddenly, one of his friends grabbed her and pushed her to the ground. Lakshmi tried running away, but they pinned her down and pulled out. This 36-year-old man poured acid on this 12-year-old's face after she rejected him. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. The man then started pouring acid over her as she screamed in pain. Lakshmi felt like she was in a horrifying nightmare as she slowly passed out. She woke up hours later in the same spot with agonizing pain, feeling like her whole body was on fire. She was about to pass out again when luckily a woman saw her and ran to her aid. Lakshmi was immediately rushed to the hospital in very critical condition. The doctors told her parents she wouldn't survive, but miraculously, after a week of fighting for her life, she began to recover. Lakshmi didn't allow this horrible incident to ruin her life and instead used it as an example to fight against acid attacks. Now, she's a motivational speaker and social activist promoting women's empowerment. Lakshmi is also advocating for the complete banning of acid and even had a TED Talk to spread awareness about acid attacks. This 3-year-old girl was trapped under an apartment building for 3 days. Elif Purinsek lived in an apartment building with her parents and sister. Just 1 week ago, she was in her bedroom listening to her dad argue with the landlord at the door. He was threatening to kick them out because they didn't pay their rent on time. Her father tried explaining that he couldn't work because of COVID and so he didn't have any money. They were yelling so loudly that Elif thought the building was shaking. But the shaking became stronger and soon everything in her room was shaking. She heard cracks from all around right before her father yelled, "It was an earthquake." Just as she ran for the door, the floor collapsed under her feet. As she fell through to the next floor, she hit her head on a large piece of concrete and passed out. Hours later, she woke up in complete darkness with a heavy weight on her legs. She then realized she was trapped under her collapsed apartment building with no way of escape. I finally have a week off school, so part 2 is out now. This 3-year-old girl was stuck under an apartment building for 3 days. Part 2. Sorry, by the way. 3-year-old Elif had just survived an earthquake to find herself trapped under an apartment building. She had a large block of concrete on her legs and was trapped in a small crevice between large chunks of the building. Now helpless and starving, she gave up and ended up passing out. But the next day, she was woken up by a loud growling-like sound from above her. Suddenly, a bright light blinded her as a large block of cement was lifted from above her. She then felt hands pulling her out and heard loud cheering as the rescue team finally pulled her out of the rubble. The video I'm about to show you of them pulling her out of the rubble will melt your heart. But first, if you want to go from not being able to fall asleep to having the best night's sleep of your life, I got you. If you get Calm on your phone, you'll be able to listen to tons of soothing stories that will help you fall asleep very quickly. Click over here if you want to check it out. This genius pilot had to choose between saving his family or 150 passengers. Sundar Padar was a 49-year-old pilot working for a renowned airline in 1963. Being the highest-ranking pilot in the city, he made a lot of money and lived in a large mansion with his wife and 2 kids. One evening, Sundar was piloting his routine 4-hour flight when he heard a strange radio interference coming from an unknown source. At first, Sundar thought it was a technical issue due to the bad weather, and so he told his flight engineer to take a look. But a few minutes later, Sundar was shocked when the interference became a clear voice coming from an unauthorized frequency. The voice said that they were an organized crime group and ordered him to crash the plane in the Bay of Bengal. But as Sundar was about to call in the SOS, the voice said, "We have your family." Sundar froze as he heard his wife's cries for help in the background. Sundar now had to decide, his family or 150 innocent passengers. This genius pilot had to choose between saving his family or 150 passengers. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. Sundar's mind began racing when suddenly he came up with a plan. He told his first mate to call the radio tower with a satellite phone they kept for emergencies. He kept talking to the hijackers, telling them he was flying over to where they wanted him to crash while using pen and paper to tell his first mate what to say to the radio tower. Once everything was set up, he began lowering the plane as if he was going to crash. But just as he got low enough, the radio tower cut off all signals and frequencies from the plane. Everyone in the radio tower began yelling as if the plane had crashed while Sundar pulled up and returned to his regular flight path. The hijackers heard the passengers. This girl murdered her professor after he called her a dishwasher. Karen Vilbert lived in Johnville in 1980. Since childhood, she always dreamt of becoming a great engineer despite her family's discouragement. And so she worked very hard and got accepted into a prestigious engineering program. As school started, she was performing very well in all her classes except for one. No matter how much she studied, she never seemed to get a good grade on tests in that class, and the professor seemed to avoid her when she tried asking questions. And so one morning, she went to meet with the professor to ask him what was going on. As soon as she walked into his office, he looked annoyed and didn't even look her face to face. When she started asking about her grades, he interrupted her and began telling her that girls didn't belong in engineering and even referred to them as dishwashers. At first, Karen tried to be polite and explain to him why he was wrong, but he kept talking over her. Each time he interrupted her, she got more and more angry until finally she had to do something. This girl murdered her professor after he called her a dishwasher. Episode 2. Sorry for the wait. Karen was furious with how unfairly she was being treated. She was so mad she picked up a paper weight and began beating him on the head. Once she stopped, her professor was covered in blood and wasn't moving. She was shocked by what she had just done and ran out of his office terrified. Karen didn't mean